Alex Morgan was 21 years old when he first stepped through the gates of the naval base, a bundle of nerves hidden under a borrowed suit jacket that was slightly too big for his lean frame. He had grown up in a small Midwestern town where the loudest thing most nights was the freight train rumbling past the fields. The Navy, the SEALs, the very idea of living alongside men who trained for war, it was another world entirely. The internship had come almost by accident. Alex was a college student majoring in logistics and supply chain management, disciplines most of his classmates found dull. But Alex loved the patterns, the way shipments moved, how efficiency or a single error could ripple outward and affect entire operations. His professors had joked that his meticulous notes could one day run an army. When he saw the listing for an administrative intern at a naval facility, he applied on a whim, never expecting to be accepted. Yet here he was, clutching a manila folder of paperwork as armed guards waved him through. The base itself seemed alive, buzzing with activity that dwarfed him. Trucks rumbled by with tarps covering crates of unknown contents. Helicopters chopped the air in the distance, the sound reverberating through his chest. Uniformed men and women moved briskly, each stride purposeful, as if they had somewhere crucial to be. Alex, by contrast, felt like a misplaced chess piece, unsure of his square on the board. His assignment was to assist Lieutenant Harris, a Navy SEAL logistics officer responsible for overseeing equipment and supply coordination. When Alex arrived at Harris's office, he was greeted not by the lieutenant himself, but by a group of SEALs lounging nearby, their laughter echoing through the corridor. "Well, look at this," one of them drawled, his arms thick as tree trunks, his camouflage sleeves rolled tightly against bulging muscles. "The Navy sent us a paperweight." The others chuckled. Another added, No, he's the SEAL's assistant." "That's his official title, right?" The nickname stuck instantly. Within minutes, everyone who passed by seemed to know it. Alex tried to laugh it off, though heat climbed his neck. He had expected to be the smallest fish in the pond, but the ridicule stung more than he'd admit. He wasn't there to impress them. He reminded himself of that. He was there to work. Inside the office, Lieutenant Harris barely looked up from his desk. "Morgan? Good. You'll manage reports, inventory lists, and scheduling. Nothing glamorous. Just don't mess it up." "Yes, sir," Alex said quickly, settling into his chair with relief. At least the lieutenant's tone was indifferent, not mocking. He could work with indifference. The first few days were a blur of spreadsheets, procurement requests, and filing cabinets that squeaked when opened. To Alex, the work was fascinating. Every line on the inventory sheets told a story night vision goggles ordered for a training exercise. Medical kits replenished after use, specialized weapons checked out by SEALs heading to the range. Most people saw endless numbers. Alex saw a pulse, the hidden rhythm of the base. But the SEALs didn't see him that way. When they walked past, they'd nudge each other, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Hey, assistant, don't drop that pen, might strain your back." Or, "Careful, don't get paper cuts. We'd hate to medevac you out." The laughter followed him down the halls. Alex endured it with quiet patience. He wasn't built like them. He knew that. His arms lacked definition. His shoulders sloped from too many hours hunched over textbooks. But while they saw weakness, he saw opportunity. Their dismissiveness gave him freedom to observe without pressure. He listened closely when they bragged about missions, noted how commanders demanded precision, and recognized how quickly chaos could erupt if even a single piece of gear was missing. Late one evening, as fluorescent lights hummed overhead, Alex lingered long after most had left. Papers cluttered his desk supply forms, maintenance requests, inventory audits. His pencil tapped as he traced numbers others overlooked. To him, every digit had meaning. Why was one crate signed out without proper authorization? Why did another list duplicate serial numbers? Were these small mistakes, or the start of something larger? He rubbed his eyes, forcing himself to focus. The work wasn't glamorous, but he knew it mattered. These men depended on precision, whether they acknowledged it or not. He had no rifle, no combat gear, but in his own way, he carried responsibility just as heavy. The next morning, when he brought reports to the commander's office, he caught sight of the medals gleaming on the man's chest, the stern face weathered by years of service. Alex placed the binder carefully on the desk, unsure if the commander would even notice him. The man flipped through the pages with a practiced eye, then gave a slight nod. "Accurate work," he muttered, almost to himself. It wasn't praise. Not exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and for Alex, it meant everything. Back in the corridors, the SEALs continued their jokes. "There goes the assistant," one said, mock saluting him. Alex only smiled faintly, letting the words pass like wind. If they wanted to underestimate him, so be it. He'd keep watching, keep learning. He suspected one day the details he tracked so obsessively would matter in ways none of them anticipated. For now, though, he remained in their eyes what they believed him to be, the SEAL's assistant, invisible, unimposing, harmless. But beneath the quiet demeanor, Alex Morgan's story was only beginning. Each morning began the same way for Alex Morgan, the rustle of starched uniforms, the thud of boots echoing through polished hallways, and the faint smell of oil and salt drifting in from the docks. He arrived early, notebook in hand, long before most interns would have thought to set foot inside. By 7 o'clock, his desk was already stacked with fresh supply requests, reports stamped in bold black ink, and yesterday's logs awaiting comparison. His routine seemed invisible to those around him. The SEALs bustled past, larger-than-life figures who barely registered the quiet young man hunched over paperwork. To them, he was background scenery, the assistant, the civilian, the paper shuffler. But Alex's eyes saw more than paper. Numbers whispered patterns to him. Orders spoke in codes. Lists that looked boring to others told stories of preparation, of lives relying on precision. The commander's office was his daily destination, and each delivery carried more weight than the SEALs realized. Alex would step inside quietly, a slim figure swallowed by the imposing room. Commander Steele, a man carved from discipline itself, would glance at the documents, his calloused fingers turning pages with deliberate care. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were clipped and exact, correct, or recheck. That was enough. Even those few words gave Alex a sense of purpose. He began to realize something vital. In an environment where life and death depended on precision, his so-called boring job mattered more than anyone admitted, but the SEALs never saw it. They measured strength in scars, pull-up counts, and grit on obstacle courses. Alex, with his bookish focus and pale hands, didn't fit their mold. Their banter never ceased. "Assistant," one would call across the room, "fetch us a coffee before you sprain your wrist with all that stapling." "Careful, don't trip over the copier," another added, smirking as his teammates laughed. Alex smiled faintly, never arguing, though part of him wished he could explain what he actually did. He wanted to tell them how one misplaced decimal could leave them stranded without critical gear, how one unchecked box could mean a medic without the right kit in the field. But he said nothing. He understood that explaining wouldn't win their respect, only actions would. Late one afternoon, while cross-referencing supply forms, Alex noticed a subtle inconsistency. A crate of night vision goggles had supposedly arrived, yet the receiving signature line was blank. He frowned, flipping to another form. A similar issue appeared at tactical vest order marked complete, but no verification of delivery. His pencil tapped against the paper as he thought. Maybe clerical oversight, or maybe something more. He jotted notes in his notebook, a habit no one else bothered with. Columns of numbers filled the page, arrows linking one report to another, highlighting small but curious gaps. To Alex, the puzzle was irresistible. To the SEALs, it was meaningless. When one of them strolled past and saw him scribbling furiously, he chuckled. "What are you, writing love letters to the printer?" Alex gave a polite nod but didn't look up. The laughter faded as the SEAL moved on, but Alex's focus remained razor-sharp. The more he dug, the more he felt the weight of his discoveries. By now, weeks had passed since his arrival, and Alex's quiet diligence was starting to ripple beyond his desk. Lieutenant Harris, still as gruff and distracted as ever, began to rely on Alex more often. "Check this list," he would say, shoving a folder across the desk. "You've got the eye for detail." Those words mattered. They were small, almost begrudging, but to Alex, they were proof he was more than the assistant nickname suggested. One particular morning, Harris asked Alex to review an upcoming shipment manifest. Alex sat with the paperwork, his pencil sliding methodically down each line. His eyes narrowed. Once again, a discrepancy emerged: duplicate serial numbers listed, for weapons that shouldn't have duplicates. He circled it in red, then typed a brief note summarizing the error. Harris skimmed the page later and muttered, "Good catch." That was all. No smile, no pat on the back. But Alex felt a rush of pride all the same. He began to notice something else too. Each time he entered the commander's office, Steele's gaze lingered a little longer. The commander never smiled, never softened, but Alex sensed his reports were being read carefully. More than once, Steele's sharp eyes met his, as if silently measuring him. Alex never broke that gaze, though his heart pounded every time. The SEALs, meanwhile, carried on with their ribbing, unaware of how crucial Alex's role was becoming. They still saw him as harmless, book-smart, a civilian who'd never crawl through mud or parachute into hostile territory. They couldn't yet imagine how this quiet observer might one day affect them directly. What kept Alex going was his own private sense of mission. He wasn't trying to prove himself with bravado or muscles. His battlefield was the page, his weapon a sharp eye. He had grown up hearing stories of his grandfather, a war veteran who used to say, "The strongest man in the room isn't always the one holding the gun. Sometimes it's the one making sure the gun is there when needed." Those words echoed in Alex's mind every time he flipped through another stack of forms. Still, he remained lonely. Evenings often found him alone at his desk, the building hushed around him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He'd pause occasionally, staring at the photographs of decorated soldiers lining the walls, their steely eyes watching over him. He wondered what they would think of him. Would they dismiss him like the others? Or would they recognize his contribution? The thought gnawed at him, but he kept working, pouring himself into accuracy. Every corrected form, every cross-checked. Order was his way of quietly proving he belonged. Then came the day when his notebook filled with too many unanswered questions. The missing signatures, the duplicate serial numbers, the shipments marked delivered but never accounted for, was no longer something he could dismiss as clerical error. His pulse quickened as he realized the implications. If gear was slipping through the cracks, someone was either negligent or deliberately covering tracks. He knew better than to jump to conclusions. But he also knew this: if he ignored it, men could pay the price in the field. So he kept his silence, continuing his routine, carrying binders to Steele's office, noting every glance, every nod. The commander didn't ask questions yet, but Alex suspected he noticed more than he let on. The SEALs, of course, remained oblivious. Their teasing rang in the corridors, as always, echoing through the base like background noise. "Hey, assistant," Don't burn yourself on that coffee pot." They laughed, slapping each other on the back, never realizing how close they stood to a truth that would soon shatter their perception of him. For Alex, the puzzle was no longer just numbers. It was becoming a thread he couldn't let go of, one that tied him to something much larger than anyone suspected. And though he didn't know it yet, the path he was on would soon test not just his skills, but his courage in ways even the most battle-hardened SEALs couldn't predict. The office was almost empty when Alex noticed it for the first time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their pale glow on rows of filing cabinets and stacks of paperwork. It was well past 9 at night, and the corridors outside had grown quiet, filled only with the occasional echo of boots belonging to security patrols. Alex rubbed his eyes, fatigue tugging at his shoulders. He had already been at the base for 14 hours, but something on the latest manifest wouldn't let him rest. His pencil tapped against the desk in a steady rhythm, keeping him awake. As he flipped between reports, a crate of high-value gear thermal scopes, to be exact, had been listed as delivered 3 weeks ago. Yet when he checked the receiving ledger, there was no signature verifying its arrival. No initials, no record of which SEAL checked it in. The line was simply blank, as though the shipment had disappeared into thin air. He frowned. Mistakes happened, yes, but this wasn't an isolated oversight. His notebook, already filled with scribbles and arrows, told a larger story. Several other shipments had similar gaps. Duplicate serial numbers, missing verification, items that appeared on one list but not the next. Alex leaned back in his chair, the realization pressing heavily on his chest. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork. It was deliberate. Someone was manipulating the system. For a long moment, he sat frozen, staring at the files. His thoughts raced. If gear was missing, if shipments were being diverted, then someone on the inside had to be responsible. And if he, an intern, a civilian, were the one to uncover it, suspicion might easily fall on him. The weight of it sank into his stomach. He wasn't supposed to be here solving mysteries. He was supposed to be the assistant, the invisible one, the kid pushing paper while the real men did their work. Yet here he was, staring at evidence that could rock the foundation of the base. He thought of his grandfather again, the old veteran who used to tell him stories by the fireplace. "The battlefield isn't always where bullets fly," the man had said once. "Sometimes it's in the shadows, where no one thinks to look." Alex swallowed hard. He had found one of those shadows. He gathered the papers carefully, laying them out across his desk. Each discrepancy, each missing signature, each number that didn't line up, it all painted the same picture. Equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars had simply vanished. But what to do? That question clawed at him. If he went to Lieutenant Harris, the man might brush it off as paranoia. Worse, Harris might suspect Alex of being involved. A civilian pointing fingers at military personnel wasn't something taken lightly. Trust here was sacred, and one wrong. Accusation could ruin a career or end Alex's internship on the spot. If he went to the SEALs, they would laugh in his face. Or worse, they might decide he was meddling where he didn't belong. That left only one option: Commander Steele. Alex's hands trembled as he stacked the evidence neatly into a folder. He wrote a concise report, his words measured and precise, just like the man himself. He didn't add speculation, didn't accuse anyone. He simply presented the facts, letting the numbers speak for themselves. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking. Pale light filtered through the blinds, painting the office in streaks of gray and gold. Exhaustion tugged at his body, but adrenaline kept him moving. He slipped the folder under his arm and walked down the silent corridor toward the commander's office. The base was beginning to stir. Trucks rumbled outside, engines coughing to life. SEALs passed him in the hallway, their laughter echoing as they joked about upcoming drills. None of them noticed the folder he carried. To them, he was still the assistant, invisible, harmless. When he reached Steele's office, the door was closed. Alex hesitated, his heart thudding in his chest. Then, with steady fingers, he slid the folder through the drop slot in the door. It was out of his hands now. Hours later, when he returned to his desk, the atmosphere on base had changed. Whispers spread like wildfire. Investigators were on site. Contractors were being questioned. The word audit floated through the corridors with the weight of a storm cloud. Alex kept his head down, but his mind was racing. Had Steele read his report? Did he know where it came from? Or was Alex still invisible in all of this? By mid-afternoon, the rumors grew sharper. The missing equipment was real. Entire shipments had been diverted off the books. Civilian contractors who handled deliveries were now under investigation. Alex sat at his desk, numb, staring at the same stack of papers he had worked through the night before. Around him, SEALs muttered in low voices, their usual bravado replaced by unease. It hit him. Then he had been right. His late nights, his obsessive note-taking, his endless cross-checking had uncovered something that could have compromised missions, endangered lives. And yet, no one knew it was him. At least, not yet. Later that evening, when the SEALs gathered in the lounge, the air buzzed with tension. How the hell did this slip past everyone? One demanded. Command's pissed, another replied. We're supposed to be the sharpest unit in the Navy, and somehow shipments go missing under our noses? Alex passed by quietly, carrying a stack of binders. The conversations hushed as eyes followed him. He felt the weight of their stares. Sharp and suspicious, the mocking had stopped. In its place was something far more dangerous. Doubt. Somewhere in those stares was the unspoken question. How did the assistant, of all people, fit into this? Alex kept walking, his face calm, though his heart pounded in his chest. He didn't dare speak, for now silence was his shield. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The laughter was gone. For weeks, Alex had grown used to the teasing that followed him like a shadow. The SEAL's assistant, they'd called him, tossing barbs with easy smiles. But now the corridors of the naval base felt different. When? Alex walked past, voices lowered. Jokes stopped mid-sentence. Men who once mocked him now studied him with guarded, skeptical eyes. Suspicion hung in the air like thick fog. The investigation had confirmed what Alex already knew. High-value equipment had been siphoned off, shipments deliberately misdirected. Contractors were under scrutiny, and the commander's staff was scrambling to contain the fallout. But the discovery had raised another question, one that spread like wildfire among the SEALs. How had the assistant spotted what trained officers had missed? It was too convenient, some whispered. Too perfect. That morning, Alex sat at his desk, typing. Quietly, when two shadowed figures appeared. Morgan, one of them said flatly. Commander Steele wants to see you. Now. The words struck like a hammer. Alex rose, smoothing his wrinkled shirt with trembling hands. His throat tightened as he followed them down the long hallway. Each step echoed too loudly, his polished shoes sounding weak against the heavy boots ahead of him. The walk felt like a march toward judgment. Inside Steele's office, the air was cold and heavy. The commander sat behind a desk that seemed carved out of stone, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, pinned Alex the moment he stepped inside. Sit, Steele ordered. Alex obeyed, the leather chair, creaking beneath his slight weight. He tried to steady his breathing, but his chest felt tight. The commander leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped. You filed that report. His voice wasn't a question, it was a statement. Iron hard. Yes, sir, Alex replied, his own voice thin but steady. Steele's eyes narrowed. How? Alex blinked. Sir? How does a civilian intern, Steele said slowly, his tone like a blade scraping steel, discover a pattern my officers, my lieutenants, and my men overlooked? You've been here, what? Weeks? And suddenly you produce evidence. That sparks a base-wide investigation? Explain yourself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alex swallowed hard. He wanted to shrink into the chair, to disappear. But he forced himself upright, meeting the commander's gaze. I checked the numbers, sir, every day. I noticed missing signatures, duplicate serials. At first, I thought it was clerical, but the patterns kept repeating. I couldn't ignore it. Steele's jaw tightened. You expect me to believe you stumbled into this by accident? That's what you're telling me? No, sir, Alex said quickly. Not by accident. By paying attention. For a moment, Steele said. Nothing. His silence was worse than shouting. His stare drilled into Alex as though stripping him bare, testing for weakness. Then came the questions, sharp and relentless. Which shipment first caught your eye? What date? What page number? How many units went missing? Who processed the paperwork? What procedure did you use to cross-reference? Alex answered each one, voice trembling at first, then steadier as he found rhythm. He spoke of manifests, of duplication errors, of missing verifications. He described how he built his notebook of patterns, how he traced the chain of custody from contractor to office. The commander pressed harder. Do you realize what you're implying? That someone inside this system, my system, failed? Or, worse, was complicit? Alex's palms sweated against the chair arms, but he didn't flinch. Yes, sir, he said quietly. That's what the numbers show? The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Steele leaned back, his hands steepled beneath his chin. He studied Alex with the stillness of a predator, his expression unreadable. Then, at last, he spoke. You may have just saved this base from scandal. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Alex blinked, barely believing them. Relief surged through him, though it was tempered by fear. If the commander believed him, that was validation. But it also meant Alex had just stepped into a dangerous arena where mistakes could shatter reputations, where accusations carried consequences. Steele's gaze remained fixed. You did the work, he said, but you've also painted a target. On your back. Men don't like being shown up, especially not by someone they mocked yesterday. You'd best be careful. Yes, sir, Alex whispered. You're dismissed. Alex rose on unsteady legs, his heart hammering in his chest. As he left the office, the world seemed sharper, more dangerous. The commander's words echoed in his head. A target on your back. The corridors outside felt colder. SEALs leaned against walls, their conversations hushed. When Alex passed, eyes followed him. Not mocking now, not friendly either, just watchful. Suspicious. One man muttered as Alex walked by, loud enough to hear. Too smart for his own good. Another's eyes narrowed, the unspoken thought clear. How did he find out? Alex returned to his desk, but the paperwork blurred before him. His hands shook as he tried to write. The air was heavy, pressing down. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, alone in his quarters, Alex sat on his bunk staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light flickered, buzzing faintly. His notebook lay on the knitstand, pages filled with neat handwriting and precise diagrams. It had started as a hobby, a way to make sense of numbers. Now it was the very reason men doubted him. He thought again of his grandfather's words about battlefields in the shadows. He had stepped onto one without realizing it. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside, boots on gravel, A door closing made him flinch. He wasn't built for this world of suspicion and hidden dangers, yet here he was, thrust into it. By morning, he made a choice. He wouldn't shrink. He wouldn't apologize for doing his job too well. He had earned Commander Steele's acknowledgement, however grudging, and that was something no joke, no doubt, could take away. Still, Alex knew respect from the others wouldn't come overnight. It would have to be earned, not through explanations, but through action. And the next test was already waiting, just around the corner. The hangar buzzed with restless energy. Crates were stacked in neat rows, the air thick with the scent of oil, canvas, and sweat. Engines hummed in the distance as vehicles idled, waiting for orders. SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, there. Voices clipped, their bodies coiled with anticipation. Deployment day always carried tension, but this time there was something else, an undercurrent of unease after the recent investigation. Alex stood on the periphery, clipboard in hand, his shirt sticking slightly to his back in the humid air. He was not supposed to be here, not really. He was still the assistant in everyone's eyes, tolerated, but never truly part of the machine. His job today was simple. Check off the lists he had revised, confirm items loaded into trucks, and stay out of the way. He moved quietly between stacks, his pencil marking boxes one by one. Each mark was more than ink. It was reassurance that lives wouldn't be jeopardized by missing equipment. His heart pounded every time he thought of the blank lines and duplicate numbers he had uncovered weeks earlier. Those mistakes weren't mistakes at all. They had been theft. And now, if his corrections held, the SEALs would deploy with exactly what they needed. Still, his presence earned stares. A few of the men glanced his way, then quickly looked back at their gear. The laughter that once followed him was gone, replaced by something sharper: curiosity, wariness, even resentment. He was no longer invisible, and that made every step heavier. The metallic clang of boots against concrete silenced the room. Commander Steele entered the hangar, his presence drawing every eye. Conversation died instantly. The commander's reputation preceded him. He didn't need to shout to command obedience. He scanned the room, his gaze like a searchlight, assessing, calculating. Then, to Alex's horror, Steele's eyes locked on him. "Morgan," the commander said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Heads turned. The SEALs followed. Steele's gaze to the slim civilian clutching a clipboard. Alex froze, the blood draining from his face. He wanted to melt into the shadows, to vanish into the crates behind him. But Steele's voice left no room for refusal. Front and center. The words rang like a verdict. Alex's legs moved before his mind caught up. Each step toward the commander felt like walking into a storm. The SEAL's stares burned into him, some skeptical, some curious, others openly hostile. He stopped before Steele, trying to steady his breathing. "Brief the unit," Steele ordered. The word struck harder than any insult ever had. Brief the unit? These were men who lived and breathed discipline, who trained their entire lives to be the Navy's elite. And Steele wanted him, the assistant, to stand before them and speak? Alex's mouth went dry. His heart thundered in his chest. For a split second, panic threatened to take over. But then his gaze fell on the clipboard in his hands, the same clipboard filled with corrected manifests, verified lists, secured shipments. This was his work. This was why he was here. And suddenly, the panic gave way to something steadier. He looked up, meeting the commander's eyes. Then he turned to face the SEALs. "Today's deployment supply chain has been secured," Alex began, his voice low but clear. The words echoed in the cavernous hangar, carried by silence. "Every crate has been double-checked. Missing signatures from previous shipments have been corrected. Duplicate serials flagged and replaced. The inventory matches exactly what's been loaded into the trucks. The SEALs watched him, their expressions unreadable. Some crossed their arms, their skepticism palpable. Alex pressed on. He explained the changes to the chain of custody. How only authorized personnel could now sign for shipments. How all deliveries would require triple verification at every stage. He outlined the new process with precision, each word clipped and exact, just like the reports he had written. At first, his voice trembled. But as he spoke, something shifted. The clipboard was no longer a shield. It was a weapon, his weapon. He knew this material better than anyone in the room. Every detail he shared was backed by hours of painstaking work. His voice steadied. Confidence crept in. One of the SEALs, broad-shouldered and skeptical, raised a hand. So what happens if the chain breaks again? If another shipment goes missing? Alex didn't flinch. Then it's caught within 24 hours, he said firmly. The system now requires redundant checks. No one person can sign off without a second verification. If someone tries to bypass it, it leaves a paper trail that cannot be erased. A man lowered his hand, expression hard but thoughtful. Another SEAL muttered, "Smart kid." Alex kept going. He explained how critical medical kits had been prioritized for this mission, how ammunition counts had been verified 3 times, how fuel reserves were tracked to the last gallon. He didn't embellish or boast. He simply laid out the facts. By the time he finished, the hangar was silent. The mocking grins were gone. The skepticism remained, but it was tempered now with something else: acknowledgement. The men who once laughed at the assistant were forced to face an uncomfortable truth. His work was the backbone of their mission. Commander Steele broke the silence. "You heard him," he said. "Follow his system. You'll thank him when you come home." With that, Steele turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the unit and Alex in the heavy silence that followed. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears. He lowered the clipboard slowly, his hands trembling despite his effort to hide it. He wanted nothing more than to retreat, to escape the weight of all those eyes. But he forced himself to walk calmly back toward the side of the hangar, head held just high enough to mask the storm inside. As he passed, he caught fragments of whispers. Didn't think he had it in him. Guys sharp. Still just an intern, though. The words weren't mocking. Not anymore. They were something different. Something new. When Alex finally reached the quiet corner, where he'd started, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His knees threatened to buckle, but inside, a fire burned. For the first time, he hadn't just survived in their world. He had stood in front of it, and it had listened. He knew respect wasn't won in a single moment, not among men forged in fire and combat, but today had planted a seed. And seeds, Alex knew, had a way of growing if given time. As the SEALs filed out, boarding vehicles that would carry them into danger, Alex remained behind, watching. They no longer looked at him with laughter. They looked at him with something else: recognition. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was the beginning. The hangar smelled of sweat, sand, and spent gun oil. The SEALs had returned. Alex stood at the far edge of the crowd, pressed against a steel beam, clutching his ever-present clipboard. He hadn't been out there with them, hadn't crossed deserts or raided compounds, but in a strange way, his heart had marched every step. For days he'd wondered if his work would hold, if the new checks and balances he had put in place would survive the chaos of deployment. Now, the answer was striding through the doors. They looked exhausted, uniforms torn and faces streaked with grime, but alive. Gear clattered as rifles were set down, helmets unbuckled. There was a heaviness to them, but also an unmistakable current of relief. And there were no missing crates, no misplaced medkits, no shortage of ammunition. His system had held. Alex's throat tightened. He wanted to disappear into the background, to observe quietly and slip away before anyone noticed him. But then, Commander Steele stepped forward. His boots struck the concrete with deliberate weight, and the room fell silent. The commander's gaze swept the men, taking in their condition. Then, with the same precision, his eyes shifted to the edges of the hangar until they locked onto Alex. "Morgan," Steele barked. Dozens of heads turned instantly. The name hung in the air, heavier than it had ever been before. Alex froze, his pulse racing. Every muscle urged him to stay hidden, but there was no hiding. Slowly, stiffly, he stepped forward into the sea of hardened warriors. The air was electric. Alex stopped a few feet from the commander. He stood small, awkward in his civilian shirt, surrounded by giants of war. His clipboard felt suddenly ridiculous in his hands, like a child clinging to a toy. The commander's expression was unreadable. His eyes, dark and piercing, studied Alex with the same intensity he might use to assess a mission map. The silence stretched, filling every corner of the hangar. Then, to the shock of every man present, Steele straightened to full height and raised his hand to his temple. A salute. The commander of Navy SEALs, a man who saluted no one but his superiors and his fallen, had turned sharply toward a civilian assistant and offered the honor first. The hangar seemed to freeze in time. Conversations halted, movements stilled. The clang of distant machinery faded. All that remained was the sight of one of the most respected men in the Navy, saluting a 22-year-old intern who weeks ago had been the butt of every joke. Alex's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought he must have misread it, that his mind had conjured the gesture out of desperation. But Steele's arm held steady, his eyes locked, unflinching. Alex's hands trembled. Slowly, awkwardly, he raised his own hand in return, his salute clumsy but earnest. His chest burned with a pressure he couldn't name. When Steele lowered his arm, he spoke. His voice was steady, deliberate, and carried through the silence. "This man," he said, his gaze still fixed on Alex, "saved lives." The words rang against the steel walls, echoing in every ear. Steele turned to his men. "You had your weapons. You had your training. But without his system, without his eyes on the numbers, some of you wouldn't be standing here. You may never understand the value of what he did, but you damn well better. Respect it." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Then, one by one, men shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd, shoulders squared, eyes lifted. And then, astonishingly, one SEAL, the same broad-shouldered skeptic who had challenged Alex during the briefing, brought his hand to his temple in salute. Another followed, then another. Within moments, the hangar was filled with the sight of Navy SEALs, America's most feared and respected warriors, saluting the assistant they had once mocked. Alex's chest swelled, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to disappear, yet he also wanted to freeze the moment forever. The salute wasn't about him as a person. It was about what he had done, what he had proven. But still, it felt like a tide washing away weeks of ridicule, suspicion, and fear. The commander broke the silence again. "Morgan," he said firmly, "this base owes you. I owe you. And from this day forward, you're not the assistant. You're part of this unit." Alex's vision blurred, his eyes stinging. He blinked rapidly, fighting back the wave of emotion. His voice caught in his throat, but he managed to whisper, "Thank you, sir." Steele gave a single sharp nod. Dismissed. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the atmosphere had changed. Men who once laughed behind his back now approached him with nods of respect. Some clapped his shoulder in passing, wordless but sincere. The broad-shouldered skeptic lingered for a moment, his expression unreadable, then gave a curt nod before walking away. Alex stood in the middle of the hangar, dazed. It had all happened so fast, yet the image of that salute was seared into his mind. For weeks he had walked under the weight of ridicule, bearing suspicion like a stone in his chest. Now, for the first time, the weight had lifted. That night, alone in his quarters, Alex sat on his bunk staring at the ceiling. The salute replayed over and over, as vivid as the moment itself. He thought of his grandfather, of the stories about battlefields fought in silence. He finally understood. His war had not been fought with weapons, but with persistence, integrity, and courage in the face of doubt. And against all odds, he had won. But even as sleep pulled at him, one truth lingered in the back of his mind. Wars never end with one battle, and respect, once won, must be carried like a torch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time, Alex allowed himself the rare comfort of victory. The salute had changed everything. In the days that followed, the atmosphere on base shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Where once there had been smirks and whispered jokes when Alex walked by, there were now nods, brief greetings, even the occasional clap on the shoulder. The mocking nickname, the SEAL's assistant, vanished as though it had never existed. But while the laughter had stopped, Alex quickly discovered that something else had taken its place. Scrutiny. Respect, he realized, wasn't given once and left to rest. It was a living thing, fragile and demanding. If he wanted to keep it, he had to feed it daily. The first test came sooner than expected. A week after the SEALs returned, Commander Steele summoned Alex to a secure briefing. The room was dim, the walls lined with maps, photographs, and tactical charts. Men sat in rigid rows, their uniforms crisp, their eyes sharp. Alex slipped into the back row, clutching his ever-present notebook, determined to remain invisible. But Steele had other plans. "Morgan," the commander said, his voice slicing through the low murmur of the room. Front. Alex's stomach dropped. Slowly, he rose and walked toward the front, aware of every eye following him. Steele gestured to a large map pinned to the wall. "We're planning another deployment. Supply integrity will determine mission. Success. You know the system better than anyone. Explain it." Alex's mouth went dry. He wasn't just briefing about crates now. He was briefing about life or death logistics before men who had faced bullets and fire. His knees threatened to buckle, but he forced himself to steady. He spoke. At first, his voice wavered, but then it found rhythm. He explained how redundancies would prevent gaps in the chain. He pointed out choke points, offered solutions, outlined how his modifications eliminated blind spots. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had built the system with his own hands. When he finished, the silence was different than before. No one smirked, no one scoffed. Instead, the men leaned forward, taking notes, eyes intent. Steele gave a single nod, then moved on. Alex walked back to his seat, his legs shaking, but inside him something settled. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was survival. The second test came not in a briefing room, but in the gym. One evening, Alex slipped inside, hoping to get in a quiet workout. The space was usually empty after hours, but tonight it was crowded. With SEALs, their muscles straining under heavy weights, their grunts echoing against the walls. Alex hesitated at the door, then forced himself forward, grabbing a modest set of dumbbells. He barely got through his first set before a voice rang out. "Hey, Morgan!" It was the broad-shouldered skeptic, the one who had once challenged him in the hangar. His grin was sharp, his tone playful but edged. "Show us what you got." The room chuckled. Not cruelly, not like before, but with curiosity. Alex felt heat creep up his neck. He wasn't built for this, not like them. His body was wiry, his strength quiet. But something in him refused to shrink. He stepped forward. What's the challenge? A barbell was shoved toward him, loaded with weight. Heavy. Too heavy for someone like him. The men circled, waiting to see if he would back down. Alex bent down, gripped the bar, and pulled. His muscles screamed, his arms trembled, sweat poured down his face. For a moment, it felt impossible. But he refused to let go. Inch by inch, the bar rose until, with a final burst, he locked his knees and stood. The room erupted not in laughter, but in cheers. Someone clapped his back hard enough to nearly knock him over. The skeptic grinned wide, shaking his head. Didn't think you had that in you, Morgan. Alex collapsed onto the bench, his chest heaving, his arms burning. He had lifted far less than they did daily, but that wasn't the point. He hadn't walked away. And that, he realized, was the real test. In the weeks that followed, more tests came. Some subtle a question asked during a briefing, an extra glance at a checklist. Others more overt a sudden demand to join a midnight inventory run, an invitation to sit at the table during debriefings. Alex took each one as it came, stumbling at times, succeeding at others. Slowly, the men began to see not just an intern, not just an assistant, but someone who carried his own weight, however different that weight might be. Still, not everyone accepted him. There were whispers, men who muttered that he hadn't earned a place in their circle that no civilian could ever truly understand. Alex didn't argue. He knew respect wasn't unanimous, and perhaps never would be. But every nod, every clap on the shoulder, every quiet word of acknowledgement reminded him that the tide had turned. One evening, Alex found himself outside. The barracks, the sky painted in deep orange by the setting sun. The broad-shouldered skeptic approached, his expression softer than Alex had ever seen. "You did good," the man said simply. Alex blinked. "What do you mean?" "The system. The checks. The way you stood up there in front of us. I gave you hell, and you didn't break. That means something." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then the SEAL offered his hand. Alex took it, the grip firm, solid, real. It wasn't a salute, but in its own way, it meant just as much. That night, as Alex lay in bed, he thought of how far he had come. From being the butt of every joke, to standing in front of men who measured worth in grit and scars. He wasn't their equal, not in strength, not in experience, but he was no longer their shadow. He was part of something bigger. And though he didn't know what trials tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing with certainty. He would face them head on, the same way he had faced every doubt, every whisper, every challenge quietly, stubbornly, and without retreat. The early morning sun glinted off the hangar's steel beams, painting the vast space in gold and gray. Alex stood quietly near the back, notebook in hand, watching the SEALs gear up for their latest mission. He had been here from the start of this deployment cycle, observing, documenting, and ensuring that the chain of custody for every piece of equipment was airtight. But today felt different. Today, he sensed the weight of the unit's eyes on him, not in mockery, not in doubt, but in recognition. Weeks had passed since Steele's salute, and the quiet intern had transformed. The men who once laughed at him now treated him as an essential part of the team. Still, respect was not guaranteed. Each day demanded proof of diligence, proof of attention, proof that the system he had built could withstand the chaos of real operations. A sudden commotion broke his thoughts. A truck carrying essential tactical gear had stalled just outside the hangar. The clock ticked, minutes stretching thin, as the SEALs prepared to depart. Without the equipment, the mission could falter. Alex's heart thumped in his chest. This was the moment that tested everything. Without hesitation, he grabbed his clipboard and sprinted toward the truck. With practiced precision, He cross-referenced inventory lists, noting missing items and recalculating replacements on the fly. The SEALs watched, some skeptical, some impressed. "Go on, assistant," one muttered under his breath, the old nickname slipping past despite everything. Alex ignored the words. Numbers, checklists, and verified orders became his battlefield. He worked quickly, issuing instructions for substitutions, rerouting crates, and updating manifests in real time. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but his hands didn't falter. Finally, with a click of the final latch, the truck was ready. Every critical item accounted for, every serial number verified. Alex stepped back, chest heaving, and watched as the SEALs climbed aboard, their weapons secure, their packs fully stocked. The tension in the air melted into motion training, discipline, and trust now operating seamlessly. Commander Steele approached, his boots heavy against the concrete. "Morgan," he said, voice calm but edged with approval. "You just saved the mission." Alex blinked. "Sir?" "You prevented a potential failure," Steele continued. "Your system caught discrepancies that would have gone unnoticed. Until it was too late. Lives could have been at risk. You've proven yourself once again." The words were not just validation. They were acknowledgement of a real, tangible impact. Alex's chest swelled with pride, tempered by humility. He had not fired a weapon, nor led a raid, but he had done something equally vital. The SEALs, now fully aware of his importance, stepped forward. Some offered nods, others placed hands briefly on his shoulder. There was no mocking laughter, only respect. Then Steele did something extraordinary. He raised his hand in salute once more. The SEALs, almost in unison, followed suit. And Alex, now fully confident, returned the salute, steady and precise. The hangar was silent, except for the sound of shifting weight and the soft rustle of gear. It was a moment that crystallized everything Alex had become. Later that evening, after the mission debriefing, Alex found himself sitting quietly outside the command center. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the small-town intern ridiculed by the strongest men in the Navy to a trusted part of their operations. He thought of the nights spent cross-referencing manifests, the fear of being discovered in error, the countless moments of doubt. Every spreadsheet, every pencil mark, every sleepless night had led to this, the acknowledgement that one person, armed only with diligence and precision, could make a difference. The broad-shouldered skeptic joined him, sitting on the nearby crate. "You did good," he said simply. "Not just once, but every day. You earned this." Alex smiled faintly. "Thanks. You're not just the assistant anymore," the man continued. "You're part of the team. Don't forget that." Alex shook his head slightly, eyes still fixed on the fading sunset. "I won't." Over the following weeks, Alex continued to prove himself. He participated in logistics planning, coordinated supply chains, and even assisted with on-the-ground operations in advisory roles. The SEALs came to rely on his calculations, his meticulous records, and his unwavering focus. Through it all, Alex remained humble. He understood that respect, like trust, could be lost in a single mistake. But he had learned the value of persistence, the power of quiet courage, and the impact of actions taken with integrity. One evening, as he packed his notes for the day, Steele approached. The commander's face, usually stern and unreadable, held the barest hint of approval. "You've changed the way we operate here," Steele said. "I don't know if you understand it yet, but you've left a mark. Not everyone can do what you've done." Alex swallowed. Words caught in his throat. "Thank you, sir," he managed. Steele nodded, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Get some rest. You've earned it." For the first time, Alex felt the weight of his journey lift. The long nights, the ridicule, the fear of being dismissed, all of it had led here. Not to fame or glory, but to purpose acknowledgement, and belonging. That night, he stepped outside the base, looking up at the stars stretched across the dark sky. He thought of the men he had observed, the missions he had indirectly supported, and the small ways he had made a difference. He understood now that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it was the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I will check again." He smiled softly, a rare, genuine smile. The SEALs were no longer just observers of his work. They were witnesses to it, and in their eyes he saw a reflection of the person he had grown into. Alex Morgan had begun as the assistant, the paper shuffler, the one no one took seriously. He had faced doubt, fear, and ridicule. And yet, through focus, persistence, and quiet courage, he had proven that strength takes many forms. As the base settled into the night, engines silenced and the hangar dimmed, Alex closed his notebook. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new tests. But for now, he let himself rest, knowing he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer the invisible intern. He was part of something greater, a team, a family forged not just in combat, but in trust, respect, and unwavering dedication. And for Alex Morgan, that was victory enough.